Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with chapter 14, verse 2. So last week's Parshas Metzora discussed how a person becomes a Metzora, how a person is considered to have this halachic status of tzaras. And now we have the halachos of what's supposed to happen in the aftermath of them having tzaras. Verse 2. Zostia Toras HaMetzora b'yom tahara. So this is the law of the person with tzaras on the day of his purification, v'huva el hakohen, and he is brought to the Kohen. Remember, because everything has to do with the Kohen's declaration. Verse 3, the Kohen comes out to the outside the camp, and the Kohen sees, and behold, he sees that the mark is healed. So now the Kohen begins to turn the wheels in terms of what happens for the person once his tzaras is over. Just a technical point, the shift from verse 2 to verse 3 is very confusing. Verse 2 ends with the person being brought to the Kohen, and verse 3 begins with the Kohen going out to the person. So which one is it? Who's going to who? So Sforna is a very practical shot. Sforna on Pasuk Beis, Zos Tievu Vala Kohen, El Makom Karov Chutz Lamachane. So the person is brought to a place relatively close to where the Kohen is, but still outside the camp. Sheyuchal HaKohen b'kavod ubli rav torach l'lechus derosa. In other words, it shouldn't be that the Kohen has to go to the other end of the earth to find this person. So the Kohen, by definition, the person with tzaras is not allowed to come into the camp. So the Kohen has to go out to the person, but before the Kohen comes out to the person comes relatively close to the Kohen to minimize the distance for the Kohen. That's how the Sforno explains it. Okay. Now let's see the Kli Yakar, who asks a variety of questions on this pasuk. Kli Yakar on pasuk base. Zostia Toras HaMetzora. Hakasav Kara O Metzora. It's very interesting. The pasuk refers to him as Metzora. Metzora, by definition, means a person who has tzaras. Mashmashu adai Metzora. So that implies he has tzaras. Ve'ech amar biyom taharaso. So what does it mean then in the next phrase on the day of his purification? Kihu Metzora ein kan yom taharaso. If he has tzaras, it's not the day of his purification. So it must be he doesn't have tzaras. So then why are we calling him a Metzora? It's just sort of a technical point. It just seems to be a little bit, the phrasing seems to be at odds internally. The ode, Eich karo yom taraso, kodem she'omar v'inei nirpa, ki kodem harafua, ein kan yom taraso. It's strange also to refer to it as the day of his purification. We say that the opening sentence here is, this is the law of the Metzora, the day of his purification. Next pasuk, he goes to the Kohen, and the Kohen sees that indeed his tzaras is cured. This implies that his purification begins before he goes to the Kohen. Well, how could that be? We spoke a lot last week that everything in tzaras has to do with the declaration of the Kohen. That's the case when he gets tzaras, and that presumably is the case when he's declared to be free of tzaras. So how can we call the day of his purification before he's going to the Kohen? The ode. Excuse me. We actually mentioned this in passing last week. Vuva la Kohen, he's brought to the Kohen. Sounds like he's going kicking and screaming to the Kohen. That's what it sounds like. I mean, either that or there's some entourage. Why? Let it just be that he goes to the Kohen. It doesn't say he goes to the Kohen. It says he's brought to the Kohen. Why does it say that? The Yod Shachar Kach so says that. Then right afterwards, it seems to contradict it. The next pasuk says the Kohen comes out to him. It implies he's not being brought to the Kohen's coming to him. There's a lack of symmetry in the next pasuk. It says the mark of tzaras, nega tzaras, is healed from the one with tzaras. It should have said the mark of tzaras is healed from the one who had the mark of tzaras. Okay, so he has all these kinds of questions. The explanation of the matter is, as we explained in last week's parsha, Shatzaras ba alavonos Yeduim. V'shem Hamakat Tzaras, V'shem Hamuka Metzora. As we discussed a lot last week, Tzaras comes because of certain sins or conduct or character. So the name of the plague that strikes the person's Tzaras, and the name of the person struck with the plague is the Metzora. Ki lashon Metzora Motzira. As we said last week, the Kli Yakar says that Metzora is a language of someone who brings out bad. Shemotzi kol raso anisteris b'kirbo elachutz legalos raso b'kol, because he brings all of his ill to the surface, and everyone sees all his negative aspects. V'shem tzaras hu lashon tzara ra. Another idea of tzaras is it's a language of a bad ill. Ratzaloma ra shehi ketzara. So a bad thing that's like a tragedy in its own right. Moshe Amar Razal, u'mitzaura osra bos v'tzaros shehem ketzara zu lazu. Okay. Kilumaka zu ein trufa b'derech hateva. Kach l'tzaras zeh ein trufa b'derech hateva lo dio. Ki yad Hashem asasazos. The whole idea of tzaras is supposed to be that it's a sign that it's the hand of God. V'tzaras namon yochiach shenilu chach me'arofim u'vakish lo trufa. It gives an example from Tanakh that if there was a person who had tzaras and people seem to be totally stuck as to what to do to heal the person. V'nega shem ha'avon. As we discussed last week, his concept is that the language of nega, which we would translate as mark, actually means the sin for which the person received tzaras. That through this sin, he's struck out at the honor of God or the honor of other people. So what it means that he's brought to the Kohen is the tzaras compels this person to go to the Kohen. Not just because he's stuck and he has to figure out how to get out of this, he has to figure out what to do with this mark on his skin, but he has to learn how to be a better person because it's clear that God has sent him a message. Guess what, says the Kli Yakar? If he was the type of person who gleaned all there was to learn from this Kohen in his midst, then he wouldn't have had tzaras in the first place. The reason why this fellow had tzaras is because he's not on his A game in terms of who he is as a person. So being that, it had to be on God's terms. God brought him to tzaras. What that means is his going to the Kohen, his learning from the Kohen. It's not because he wanted to become a better person. It's because circumstances have compelled him to become a better person. And so he's been brought to the Kohen, so to say. So now the Kli Yakar says, now let's look back at the pasuk. This is the law of the person with tzaras on his day of purification. Ki biyom she'icharich leiv tar b'kirbo. When this pure heart renews within him, the kabla love lashuv b'tshuva, and he accepts upon himself to repent. Bo bayom yuva ba'al korcho el kohen lilmod mimenu derech Hashem. A very novel pshat from the Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar suggests that this is not the standard approach. The Kli Yakar suggests that what it means on the day of his purification, we don't mean on the day that he doesn't have tzaras anymore. What we mean is when he finally has his aha moment, when he says to himself, I've got to become a better person. So he is a Metzora. He still has tzaras. But on the day that he begins, what's that phrase? The first day of the rest of his life, something like that. On the day that he begins his purification, that he begins to recognize he has to become a better person, that God is sending him a message, that's the day of his purification. That's the beginning of his spiritual purification. And that's the day that he's brought to the Kohen. That's the day that he recognizes, wow, I really need to try to figure out how to be a different human being. And I'm going to need to hopefully take advice from the Kohen regarding that. V'lashon v'huva eino medaber v'hetek mimakom l'makom. When we say he's brought to the Kohen, we don't mean he's necessarily, going, he's not necessarily taking a bus from one place to another. Ela medaber v'hetek libo. We mean it's the travels of his heart. Min haderech harash or hayabo, from the negative path in which he found himself, el haderech hatov, to the appropriate path. V'shikabelav l'skar v'lakohen. The point is, he accepts upon himself to come close to the Kohen, ulevakish Torah mipiu, and to ask Torah from his mouth. V'alza Omar zos tia Toras. He says also, that's what it means. This is the Torah of the Metzora. It's not just the law of the Metzora. It's the whole lessons associated for the person. Now, once he's allowed his heart to travel, so to say, and he accepts upon himself to be a person of pure thought and a person of pure perspective. Azai, nega oso avon shegaram lo atzaras min atzurom zulasam. V'lo yochel lomar min anagua shorya avon masav garmu lo v'chutzrach lomar min hatzarua. So now what it means that he's healed doesn't mean that the mark is necessarily gone just yet, but it means he's become a new person. And the sin, nega tzaras, he says here, means the sin for which he got tzaras has now been healed. Okay, so very different perspective on the pasuk. I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Okay, we're going to go on to verse 4. So now the Kohen sees, wow, again, back to a more standard pshat. The standard pshat is the Kohen looks at the person, the Kohen sees there's no tzaras anymore. Verse 4, the Kohen gives instructions. He brings for the person who will begin his purification two living pure birds, ve'etz erez ushni tolas ve'zov, and cedar wood and scarlet wool, and this hyssop tree. Okay. And now verse 5, and the Kohen gives instructions, and they slaughter one of the birds into an earthenware vessel mixed with the flowing water. Okay, let's begin to see this Kli Yakar, which we'll see tomorrow, God willing, because it just turned to 9:45. So we discussed today both the Sforno and the Kli Yakar in terms of this interesting pasuk of the person being brought to the Kohen. And what exactly does that mean, to be brought to the Kohen?